Hey there, this is Dan, and you're watching The Salty Sea. And I'm not here with a guide today. I'm not here with any fun, silly lists. I'm here with something that I've been hoping to be here with for a long time, which is some actual tournament results. Um, Warcry, you know, let's talk about tournaments and Warcry for a second because um, I felt like there was a lot of energy. When the game was starting, that really got sort of leveled out by the pandemic. Um, the Adepticon that was canceled was planning to have Warcry involved. I know there were early Warcry tournaments, before the Grand Alliance books. Um, and unfortunately, the pandemic killed a lot of that momentum. And then I think even going into the summer, I think a lot of people were excited for it. And unfortunately, you know, um, it's been hard to do events of any kind. 40K and AOS have had events. You could argue back and forth over whether that's responsible given how many people you can put into a room. But we haven't actually had a ton of sort of large Warcry events, partly because I think, it was a new game and a lot of that momentum was sort of nipped right in the bud before it could really get going. That being said, though, some stores are running events. So I see on Best Coast Pairings, for example, in the app, you know, 2 events per month are happening. And I know that BCP captures, a tiny, tiny percentage of the LGS events that actually go on. Um, Obviously for bigger events, like many, I think more than half of them use that system, but for LGS events, almost none do. Um, so this is where kind of you guys come in. I would love if anyone here has been to one of these LGS events, if you have any way of gathering the data, um, or letting me know who to get into contact with to find out. I would love to delve a little deeper and get some more events from around the world. Um, but until then, I'm really excited because there is a store in Wroclaw, Poland. I hope that I pronounced that right. I hope so. Probably failed, but we'll see. They've actually been keeping records on what their tournaments results have been over the summer and autumn of this year, which is incredibly exciting. And let's just kick it to the spreadsheet so I can show you what's been going on. All right, so let's go back in time to June 14th. By the way, this store has run 4 events, which is awesome. Way more events than anyone I know have run. So normally, with a game that has sort of a well-established tournament scene, you'd take 8-player events and you wouldn't necessarily throw them out, but you wouldn't place a bunch of stock in them, right? Like Magic has, you know, dozens of stores in every city who have F&M sometimes, and you don't really analyze F&M data. Um, but what this is giving us is a really awesome snapshot into one local meta, which you know would that be the same as what kind of big meta would arise out of, lots of large events? Probably not. But that doesn't mean it's any less informative, especially given, what we have access to. Um, my econometrics professor once told me it's not so much about having the perfect data set. His PhD was with 42 data points. It's about how well you understand that data set and what it says. So we'll give it a try, right? So back in June, so what, 4 months ago now, um, they had an event, 8 players, 6 rounds, matched play, and the winners and the second place were both Ogre Maw tribes. Both had the double Thunder Fist. So it was, the list that I've recommended for them is 2 Thunder Fist, a Gorger, and all Noblars. I don't know if they were deciding on the Gorger for their third big piece, or if they just had all Noblars, or if they had, some combination of maybe Frost Sabers, something like that. But I do know it was taken out by 2 double Thunder Fist lists. And the really incredible thing, talking to at least one person who was there, is that um, that was the first time when people really discovered that Maw Tribes beats Skaven. Um, Giant Rat. So the Thunder Fist, if you don't know, its thing is um, does a ton of damage at range, and then there is an ability where you can use a double to get a bonus attack action if you killed something. Now, this is a pretty basic ability. A ton of leaders have it in the game. Um, every Corn unit has it in the game. But the reason it's valuable on a Thunderfist is that it's so easy for a Thunderfist to one-shot kill a chaff unit, and giant rats are even easier to one-shot kill because they, have so little HP. And so two Thunderfists can just blow the board to smithereens if you have just a ton of really easy one-shot killable chaff. People had been sort of theorizing that the Thunderfist was sort of the anti-meta pick for a while, um, but people hadn't really been proving it. I've talked to some people who have had sort of one match anecdotes in their to talk about. But in this tournament, there were two Skaven lists and two Maw Tribes lists, 6 rounds. Both of the Maw Tribes lists, each one of them beat both of the Skaven lists. Um, so just a really, you know, 4 game sample size is not ironclad, but given what other people have been saying in their testing, I think that's really exciting because, we went into the summer, in my competitive tier list that I did last May, I ranked Skaven number 1. I think they're still the most oppressive in any sort of, um, you know, in a vacuum power level situation. But Maw Tribes really does answer them, at least when you're looking at just within faction. Um, then we also had another tournament from them, same store, 2 weeks later. Totally different meta, which is kind of cool. The Maw Tribes list was a little softer, no double Thunderfist here. Someone still brought Skaven and came third, but the winning group was Legions of Nagash, then Corvus Cabal. The exciting thing about the Corvus Cabal win is that, there are people, or sorry, the second place from Corvus Cabal, but there are tons of people who will tell you, and it seems to be, I don't know how this rumor got started. Maybe it was people getting one box and then losing to AOS forces, but there's this persistent rumor that we can't seem to kill in the Warcry community that the Warcry specific warbands are terrible. It's especially, probably the most popular person who talks about Warcry's tabletop minions. Someone told him it was true, and he's repeated it on his channel. And I think people just kind of say it's true. It's not true. Okay, any of the not any of them, but several of the Warcry specific warbands, if you get 2 boxes of them, not just one, so that you can specialize and cut out some of the weaker units that come in each box. Um, Several of them are really powerful. Splintered Fang is incredibly powerful if you're willing to convert a bunch of extra snakes. Corvus Cabal is really powerful with 2 boxes. Untamed Beasts is decent with 2 boxes. Um, there's a ton of ways that you can sort of really help these uh, warbands out if you sort of get a little bit more and specialize. Because remember, nobody's just these AOS forces, no, none of them are just one box, right? A few of them are, right? Like Bone Splitters is, but most of them, you have to get multiple boxes to get them, or you're getting a start collecting box, which, again, that's much bigger than just the $50 Corvus Cabal box that you get. So I do hope that I can dispel that nasty rumor that has sort of plagued our game, um, because it's not true. And so it's really cool to see this Corvus Cabal second place here in this little tournament. Um, I'm not going to go over the LON list that won, just because it is completely outdated due to the arrival of Soulblight Gravelords that came in, was it late July, early August? Can't remember. Um, but this tournament I found to be absolutely fascinating, right? Because again, this is a local meta, so they've all played each other at this point before. And the crazy thing about Skaven, right? So when I was doing the sort of my competitive and budget and suite lists for Skaven, for all the Chaos factions, I mentioned, do you want the Contorted Epitome? And for Skaven, I just said LOL no, because the things that Skaven are doing are more powerful in a vacuum anyway than the Contorted Epitome, so you don't need it. Um, I still think that in a vacuum, that's true. But again, talking to people now, there were no Ogre Maw tribes in this tournament. There was a Thunderfist in the third place Gloomspite Gets list that I'll talk about in a second. But the apparently putting in the Contorted Epitome into Slaanesh, being able to neutralize one Thunderfist per round is sort of the thing you need to make that matchup more even. So just a really interesting little sort of uh, give and take situation going on between sort of the Maw Tribes lists and the Skaven lists. I would love to see that play out over larger tournaments more often, but yeah, just an incredible piece of sort of response, counter response, point counterpoint that you see there. Now, the second place Soulblight Gravelords list is interesting too. This person was using a Vargulf Courtier ally from Flesh Eater Courts, which is great because of the abilities that it gives you. And then it's also putting 5 Graveguard onto the battlefield. And that's, incredible to see, though it certainly goes along with everyone who is concerned about Graveguard dropping down to 70 points. Seeing them take second in this tournament definitely adds some fuel to anyone who is worried about that. But so the Vargulf, it has the movement ability buff that comes with all Flesh Eater Courts leaders, and then it also has sort of in later turns it has this huge self burst damage ability, so that um, once it's not supporting the graveyard, it turns into a self-contained hammer unit, which is really nice as an ally. I still think in Flesh Eater Courts you'd probably choose the Infernal as a sort of self-contained piece, but I just love what the Courtier is doing here as an ally. You absolutely could choose other Flesh Eater Courts allies for the Graveguard, but I think this player has done an awesome job sort of piecing together the puzzle for how to complete these, incredibly powerful Graveguard who still just have movement 3 and finding the right way to complement them. It really makes me want to test out other solid movement 3 units, like Plague Bearers or the Lumineth Hammer guys, um, other solid units that have movement 3 in combination with movement buffs. I know that I've sort of put a bunch of theoretical lists out on my channel um, for people who want to try them out. But this is someone actually trying out the concept for real and doing really well, taking second in a tournament, which I think is really exciting and is really inspiring to me as far as like what I would want to test with the next warband that I would build and paint. I also want to talk about and by the way, to that, I did just recently paint up an Abhorrent Arch region, so I might be able to, if I get another Death Force, ally that in, and then test some of those ideas myself. Um, Gloomspite gets with the Ogre ally. This is something that I've sort of theorized in a few of my Gloomspite videos and a few of my destruction videos as, one of the more powerful things you can do in destruction. Um, because the Ogre Thunderfist being able to blow up chaff at range, and then the Squig Hopper boss being able to, fly around the board and also effectively blow up chaff. I talk about a very similar list to this Gloomspite Gets one in my Gloomspite guide from about a month ago that you can check out. Also, I think there's a similar one in my starter lists for, actually maybe not, but there definitely is one in my Gloomspite Gets guide. Um, so really cool to see that there. Um, Gloomspite are just sweet, and I love that they're good in this game because of how, historically they've struggled in AOS. So any lovers of Gloomspite, absolutely, you can bring your Gloomspite into Warcry, and there's even precedent for, people doing really well with them. And speaking of which, they actually ended up taking second in another tournament that just happened this past weekend. Now, there's some space here in between that August and October tournament. I don't know if that was caused by Delta variant. I don't really know what Poland's COVID situation is. But the crazy thing you see here is Cruel Boys taking out the top. So when Cruel Boys came out, there were a lot of people in the community worried about Potgrot. I personally was worried about Potgrot. I did a little bit of complaining in that video. I think, a significant amount of that video is me sort of being upset that it seems like GW doesn't understand sort of the building blocks of the game in terms of how these really super cheap units kind of break them, whether it be giant rats from Skaven, Aether Wings, or Potgrots, or like Noblars coming out of Ogre Maw tribes, stuff like that. So the Cruel Boys list that won, really well put together, exactly 1,000 points. So you have Killaboss on Nashtooth, um, more Boy Boss. I'll talk about that more in a second. 3 Hobgrot Slittas for some range power, and then 8 Potgrots to just completely flood the board. 13 models, you're everywhere. Um, Now, the Killaboss on Nashtooth and the more Boy Boss together, that is a little bit sort of risky depending on the table because, both of them are incredibly well statted, well put together fighters. If the terrain allows them to be effective, they can both have an issue there. But the really cool thing about the Morboy boss is, you know, point for point, I still think a Squig Hopper boss is a little bit better. That fly, of course, is much better. But the Morboy boss is great because it has access to Wa. Now, the Potgrots, incredibly tanky for the points. But it does take some effort to actually put them where they need to be, right? They're not move 3, they're move 4, so that's not the worst thing. But they still need some help. And you know, in my Dominion guide, I wish I'd added in allies, because the Morboy boss really does just add everything that you need there. Because yeah, you'd rather have the Squig Hopper boss, but Squig Hopper boss doesn't have access to the same abilities, right? So being able to boost their movement coming out of um, the Bone Splitter's ability, awesome. Bone Splitters and Iron Jaws both have access to this, and it really lets you put the Potgrots sort of right in the opponent's face right away, which really helps your Hobgrot Slittas because Hobgrot Slittas do really solid range damage, but only from 7 inches away. So it's really easy for opponents to close with them, and then they die pretty quickly, right? So um, they're these really hard to use pieces. But when your Potgrots can just run up and just be sort of this shield wall in the way, your Hobgrot Slittas, you're going to be able to make the most of them. It's really nice. In this player's tournament report, they said that they were actually able to win with killing very few models just by winning the placement game and just taking out, 1 or 2 by an objective by sort of focusing the range damage from the Slittas and, running the 2 cavalry units onto there. So um, really cool, just the way that this lets you win objective missions. Now, this tournament didn't have any, or at least that player didn't play in any of the hunter missions, which could have potentially been a little more difficult depending on which hunter mission was there. I think No Mercy could have been a little punishing. I think the one where you kill the hammer could have been tough, but for the most part, I think this list is really well put together and you know, going to be a nightmare for anyone on an objective mission. Um, I think your real hope is just to hope that you're fighting it in a hunter mission where there is a bit of a damage issue, especially if you're able to use terrain to play keep away from the Morboy boss and Killaboss. This list could also, again, like I just mentioned before, could really run into some tight, scary moments for itself, depending on how much terrain is on a given board. I would hope for any large tournament there would be sort of a wide variety of boards where some have a ton of terrain, some have a little less. I know the Kill Team community has done a ton of really good work on sort of what terrain should look like on, they use the same size board as we do. I would be really excited to kind of learn from some of the stuff they've talked about in that community to kind of bring it into Warcry. But Really awesome list. Love to see it. Um, you know, kind of scary if GW in the next edition, still has cheap units sort of ruling like this. But also, I heard that this player had they did a ton of work to source all these pot grots. None of these are just sort of random uh, gits that were just sort of stuck together, or, glued a little green stuff pot to. Apparently, they were all real pot grots, which is pretty cool. Um, the Gloomspite gets list is also really funny. Um, so 3 cave squigs is a lot of cave squids. Um, Now, if you watch my Gloomspite guide, the main thing I said about cave squigs is they're feast or famine. Um, they're really hard to use effectively because they die pretty quick, but they do an incredible amount of damage for their points. So it does look like this player was able to really utilize them effectively. I think cave squigs are one of the most skill testing units out there, especially, the combo with a squig herder often tempts you to put the cave squig into a far too vulnerable position where it can just get taken out. Um, so if they were able to take second in this tournament, they probably did an awesome job sort of deploying those squigs, and, all credit to them. I'm really impressed. Finally, the shooters, herders, and nettas really let you sort of pump up the numbers in this warband. This warband has, I think, full 10 units. So there's not going to be a lot of times when you get totally outnumbered on objectives. And I think that's great. The Skaven list is similar to the Scary list, but packing 2 warp fire throwers instead of the base list. Um, Really interesting. The Warp Fire Thrower is not a bad unit. It's got a little bit of range damage, can certainly help in some deployment situations. I'm not sure I would run 2, and I'm not sure I would run a Master Molder and a Pack Master in the same list if I only had 1 Rat Ogre. But really interesting technology, and it really makes me think about um, whether or not actually 1 Warp Fire Thrower might actually just be better than what I thought the um, staple Skaven lists were. So something I would really be excited about testing out. I actually just ordered some interesting third-party models to maybe start a Skaven list of my own. So um, gonna see if I can find an interesting sort of conversion opportunity for a warp fire thrower, and see if I can put something similar to this together. Pretty cool there. Um, so overall, just really fun to check out the sort of evolution of this metagame. The way you get the sort of call and response between the Maw tribes and the Skaven. Um, Now, again, this Cruel Boys list didn't see any of the classic Ogre mod, didn't see a Thunder Fist, didn't see a Contorted Epitome. Neither of those were in the tournament. But I still think it's really promising as far as, if you love the Pot Grot, they already have a tournament win on their hands. And, maybe even though none of the other sort of scarier threats in the game were there, I think, FEC is no joke. This Gloomspite Gits list and this Skaven list, they're no joke, even if they're not sort of the cookie cutter versions. Um, the Seraphon list did have 8 uh, blowpipe skinks in it. Um, the Vanguard list had 4 Aether Wings. So it's not like they were all just soft lists here. Um, you had to get real wins against, real warbands that had gotten wins against other real warbands. So um, really cool. So there you have it. The snapshot of one local meta happening in Poland where they've been getting a ton of games in. It's really exciting seeing both kind of the play testing of various theories that a lot of people in the community have had, combined with some of the list building that's come out of there. Some stuff that I hadn't thought of that I really wish I had, which is exciting to me. I think it's really cool. Um, you also see, like any local meta, there are certain factions that just aren't represented that you wonder if they would be changing, the way other people are building their list, right? You don't see any sort of classic Slanesh demons, which are one of the scariest war bands. Um, the Vanguard list, has a few Aether Wings, but isn't like fully spamming Aether Wings, which, would create a totally different puzzle for players to solve. Stuff like that can be um, a reason why you don't just take them as gospel, you take them as a really interesting thing to learn from. So I hope people won't say, oh, these are just, 8 or 10 player events, they don't mean anything, because that's absolutely not true. And I also hope people won't say, like, oh, you know, this faction won these events, so nothing else matters in the game, right? Because that's clearly not true either. Um, but still, just a ton to really absorb and learn from with these tournaments. Um, you know, might be poring over the results even more just kind of for fun. Certainly lots of sort of lists to test on your own. And I'm really hoping that, we can get a few more events. So for example, Adepticon is going to be announcing what's going to be at that sort of massive convention, wargaming convention, um, later this year, probably early December. If you know the email to email, get a bug in their ear. Let's make sure there's a Warcry event going on at that convention. I have a lot of hope that maybe when Red Harvest comes out, we can get some events going on with that. So a lot to look forward to in the game. Uh, like I've mentioned a few times on the channel, GW hired new people to work on Warcry last spring, so we know that they're committed to the future of this game, and so it's going to be exciting to see sort of the rate of events growing over time. So until that happens, may all your rolls be crits.